This video tutorial is designed to help you understand the requirements in Section A of Paper 1 of the new Edexcel 9-to-1 exams in GCSE English Language. It covers the structure of Section A, the question types, the sort of responses you're expected to give, and how you can manage your time most effectively for this part of the exam paper. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through Section A of Paper 1 of the new Edexcel 9-to-1 GCSE exam in this video. What you can see on your screen at the moment is the top of the front sheet that you'll get on the exam paper. And the first thing to notice is that the total time for Paper 1 is 1 hour 45 minutes. And it tells you that you must have a reading text insert, and that's the 19th century prose fiction extract. When you get into the exam, just have a quick check to make sure that text extract is in there, that reading insert is in there. If it isn't, put your hand up and ask the invigilator for one, because sometimes they get missed when the exam papers are being set out in the exam hall. If we scroll down and look at the instructions, you are told to use black ink. That's because they scan the exam papers in and they get marked electronically. You need to fill in all of your information in the exam, and you are told, importantly, you must answer all questions in Section A. That is the section on the 19th century prose fiction text. All of the questions in that section are compulsory, and then when you get to Section B, which is the imaginative writing, you have to choose one of those tasks to do. Okay? You are told to spend an hour on Section A. Now there are only 4 questions in Section A, and you only have one extract from a 19th century prose fiction text, which is roughly 600 words long. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit more about how you manage your time in Section A in a moment. And then the remaining 45 minutes of the exam are spent crafting and writing your response to an imaginative writing task. Where it tells you to answer the questions in the spaces provided, this might seem obvious, but when we look at the questions in Section A, it's very important with those first 2 questions that you keep your answer to the space provided on the exam paper. They're short answer questions and they don't want you to be writing lots. They've deliberately restricted the amount of space you've got for your answer to prevent you wasting time on those low scoring questions. Okay, so the total for the paper is 64 marks, and you can see the marks for each question shown in brackets next to the question, and that's an indication of how much you should write and also how long you should spend providing your answer to each of the questions. Okay, so let's go on and have a look. So you get your extract. Okay, this will be your extract, and the first sort of 15-20 minutes of the exam you need to spend reading this extract. And what you need to do initially is to skim read it, and when you're skim reading it, try and get an idea of the themes that are being presented. You could make a note on it using the acronym CITE, so you could make a note about the setting, a general note about the setting, about any ideas that seem to be being presented, about the themes that are being explored, and any important events that are taking place in this extract. Once you have skim read the text and you've got a general overview of what it's about, you can then go back and do some more detailed reading for meaning, because you know that in question 3 you are going to be asked to analyse in detail specific language and structural techniques at word, sentence, paragraph level. So you need to go back after that initial skim reading and pick out any significant language features or structural features. And I would advise you to do some colour coding there, maybe have language features in one colour and structural features in another. Okay, so begin by a general skim reading to identify the elements of sight, and then a more detailed reading for meaning, close reading, looking at specific language and structural techniques that you can then refer to in your response to question 3. And then when we come to the questions, you can see that questions 1 and 2 are low scoring, so they're worth 1 or 2 marks each. Both of these questions direct you to a very narrow section of the text, just a couple of lines, and question 1 will always ask you for a direct quotation. All they want you to do is lift the quote, write it in that space that they've provided, and do nothing else. They do not want you to explain the quote. They don't want you to comment on it in any way. They just want the quote lifted and written in that space. When we come to question 2, again, it gives you a very narrow line reference. It's worth 2 marks, and you get 1 mark for each example you're able to give. So it will give you a particular focus. Here it's this idea of tiredness, and you have to find 2 examples from that narrow line reference to show the way that this particular character has been affected by tiredness. For this question, you can either quote directly or you can paraphrase. It is probably safer to quote directly. The danger with paraphrasing using your own words is that you may have slightly misinterpreted the quotation. Whereas if you just lift the quotation and write it down, there's no question about whether you've understood it or not. If it's right, it's right. If it isn't, it isn't. Okay? And you can see again, they've restricted the amount of space you've got because they don't want you to explain. They're not asking you to explain how Cornelius is affected by tiredness. They're simply asking for evidence from the text. They're testing your scanning skills. They're asking you to scan for evidence related to a particular idea, which in this case is the idea of tiredness. So simply scan the text, find your 2 quotations and simply write them down. Copy them off the text. Make sure you copy the spellings correctly. If you're copying off a text, there's no excuse for incorrect spelling because you're just copying from the text that you're working with. Okay, let's go on to question 3. Now question 3, the wording of question 3 will always be basically the same. It is always going to ask you to look at a relatively narrow section of text, and it is always going to ask you about how the writer is using language and structure to show a particular idea or to develop a particular theme. This question requires an analytical PED essay response. This is the question where you need to zoom in to word, sentence and text level features. You need to use the correct technical terminology to refer to the features that you're identifying, and you must explain the effect of each technique that you identify. Remember, it is not enough to identify and name the technique using the correct terminology. What they're looking for is an essay that shows an understanding of the way that those techniques are being used to create meaning. So we're using inferential understanding, and we're looking for the connotations of the language use and the structural features that are being used in this particular section of text. That question is worth 6 marks, okay, and you have 1 side of A4 in which to write your response. So although they want a PED essay response, they don't want a really long essay. The important thing here is that you comment on elements of language, and you must also comment on at least 1 specific element of structure. So that could be something like the sentence structures and forms, it could be punctuation, it could be the use of repetition, it could be foreshadowing, something that's going to come later in the text. Okay, all of your evidence in your P paragraphs must only come from that narrow line reference. If you refer to anything outside of that line reference, the examiners cannot credit it. You cannot be given a mark for anything that comes from outside of that. You must stick very strictly within the confines of the lines that are referred to. So when you read this question, the bits that you need to highlight are the line reference and the focus of the particular question, because the essence of the question is the same. It's always about language and structure, but you need to understand which bit of the text you're looking at and what the particular focus of your analysis needs to be. Okay, so then we come to question 4. This is the last question on the 19th century prose extract, and again the basic wording of this question will always be the same, and the requirement of this question will always be the same. It will always ask you to evaluate the text as a whole in relation to a particular element of sight. And what it's asking for is a PED essay, where you take a step back from that close detailed analysis at word, sentence and text level, and you provide a critical overview. You must still support your comments, as it tells you in the question, with references to the text. They can be in the form of direct quotations, they could be paraphrased sections of text, or they could be referenced to particular events or things that are taking place in the text. Okay, so as with question 3, the basic wording is the same. So when you read this question, the bit you need to highlight is the bit that comes after "there is an attempt to show," because the bit "how important it is to concentrate on a task" is specific to this text. That is the focus of this particular question for this particular paper. That's the thing that you need to understand, so that your evaluation relates back to that in all of your comments. All right. Now, in terms of timing, the general rule with these papers is that it's a mark a minute. However, you have a whole hour to spend on section A, on these 4 questions. So I would advise spending a little bit longer on some of these questions. You've got about 15-20 minutes reading time at the beginning, and then you can afford to spend around 20 minutes on question 4, maybe 12 to 15 minutes on question 3, and then you can spend 4 or 5 minutes answering question 2 and 2 or 3 minutes answering question 1. So you have more time to answer these questions, and that is how you go about answering section A questions on paper 1.